Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Coca-Cola34. I'm here today to talk about another episode of Prehistoric Subject Files, and today we're going to talk about a request, Allosaurus. Now, straight into it with Allosaurus. Now, Allosaurus was a allosaurid dinosaur, a Carnosauria to be more specific. Well, it was part of the Carnosauria family. It lived around 155 to 150 million years ago, from the Kimmeridgian to the early Tithonian. Its name means different lizard due to the differences it has from other carnivorous dinosaurs, well, at the time when it was discovered, in its vertebrae. Now, it was first described in 1877 by O.C. Marsh, but it was described as Antrodermis, which is a genus name that is currently numen dubium. It's not really in use anymore. It's been retired. It's not in use. Now, this predator is known for its serrated teeth, its sharp teeth. It's also got the horns. Now, size may range from person to person. The average size range for an Allosaurus is estimated to be about 8.5 meters. However, there have been fragmentary specimens that indicate animals of much larger scale. Some people reckon that they actually got to about 12 meters. In my opinion, that's a bit too large for an Allosaurus. And they were estimated at around an average of 2.5 tons, which is quite light for a predator that size. Now, Allosaurus on its own is a dangerous carnivore, but speculation is that they actually lived in packs, or maybe they hunted in packs. There's some debate on it. There's some debate saying that these animals were actually quite aggressive and would actually live solitary lives and only come together in packs during, let's say, a prey's migration, or maybe when they find a large herbivore, an injured herbivore, and they decide to take it down and then feed on it and then leave and just become solitary again. But in my opinion, I think it's a bit of both, in my opinion, just because in certain animal societies, you can exile an individual, and that individual can choose to live on its own, or it can choose to find a pack. So it's kind of like lions or maybe wolves, because they have pack societies, and sometimes they'll have members either kicked out or even killed. Depends what your belief is on this. I believe it's a mixture of maybe family pack as well as maybe packs of individuals that aren't related, and they eventually breed and produce new young and stuff like that. It all depends on your opinion, to be honest. Now, the skull of Allosaurus is actually quite unique in some Carnosauria, though there is some evidence to suggest that maybe this animal used a technique, not like the hatchet-axe technique, which many have said, where it slams its top jaw down into the prey like Planet Dinosaur actually showed. But however, a more recent study showed that would actually just waste a lot of energy, so it's more of a ripping technique, usually used in ambush techniques. So this predator may have been an ambush predator, and there is some suggestion they may have ran down its prey because of the shape of the metatarsals on its feet. But recent study shows that hatchet or the axe technique isn't really valid anymore. Which is a bit, it really does make sense, because you've got to think these predators have got to keep themselves up for a long time. They've got to feed themselves a lot, and if they're using that same technique, it's going to end up fracturing the skull. And plus, you'd see a lot of stress fractures, and maybe some marks, and maybe some more broken teeth than usual, maybe even less teeth, if the axe technique actually slams the top jaw down, because that technique's got to break a couple of teeth and maybe put some stress on the skull, even though the skull has been measured to take a lot of stress, but over time it would have an impact on the actual skull. Now, the skull of Allosaurus is actually distinguished by these several characteristics. First of all, the skull to body ratio is actually been shown to be, for a 7.9 meter long animal, the skull on average is 33.3 inches. Additionally, the premaxillary bone actually contains 5 teeth. The maxillary bones, they contain 14 to 17 teeth. The dentary contains 14 to 17 teeth. And what you'll actually find with the teeth is actually the teeth get shorter, narrower, and actually more curved the further you go to the back of the skull. They also have the characteristic crests on them. They're called lacrimal crests. Basically, these are extensions of the lacrimal bone. It's been hypothesized that they actually had a keratin sheath over them, maybe for protection or maybe to actually basically be more for display, which is pretty obvious because look at them. I think males and females would definitely use them for sexual dimorphism. It may have also there's a pit in the actual lacrimal bone that may have actually been for a possible salt gland of some kind, so maybe excreted salt, but it all depends. It could have been actually for something else. Now, what they've actually found and what I've actually seen as well is that the actual lacrimal bone actually changes not only in ontogenetic stages but also between individuals. You actually look at different individuals and they have different shaped lacrimal crests, which obviously shows individual variation within the genus as well as the species of Allosaurus. Now, there's a distinct area on the back of the skull of Allosaurus which has actually been found to be a rough muscular attachment area, which is it's basically sort of a ridge on the back of the skull roof, which allows for basically muscle attachment, which is quite distinct in Allosaurus. There's some other key aspects to the actual skull. There's actually something called the maxillary sinuses, which are basically found in more basal species like the predators that lived alongside Allosaurus, like Ceratosaurus. This pretty much means it's a basal trait, but it's actually been used possibly to help with smell, so this may have shown that Allosaurus had a great sense of smell. But also it's been proposed that maybe Allosaurus may have had a Jacobson's organ. A Jacobson's organ is basically like when a snake flicks its tongue out and retracts its tongue tickles or basically like flicks at the top of its mouth roof, and an organ actually takes particles out, basically takes particles that have been collected by the tongue and sends it to the brain, and the brain reads it and basically is like interpreting the information. The brain case roof is actually very thin in Allosaurus, and it's been proposed that maybe this actually helped with thermoregulation of the brain cavity, so basically control the temperature better in the brain cavity. The joints in the skull and lower jaw allowed for motion, especially in the lower jaw, which had loosened joints, and basically what it allowed for the bottom jaw to do is kind of bow outwards. The brain case and frontals also have joints, so this animal had a lot of flexibility in its skull that allowed for it to actually distribute pressure when attacking or maybe eating prey. There's some other skeletal unique traits that Allosaurus has, such as the neck has 9 vertebrae, the sacrum has 5 vertebrae, the tail currently has an unknown number of vertebrae, though it's been estimated around 45 to 50. The neck vertebrae and the back vertebrae actually possess air sacs, basically making this animal more basically agile. The rib cage is broad and barrel shaped. It has some belly ribs that are known as gastralia, and in one specimen it actually found that the animal may have actually tripped and it actually belly flopped on these gastralia, which pretty much cracked him, basically wounding it, which is quite funny because that'd be amazing just to see a belly flopping Allosaurus. Allosaurus also has wishbones. The hip bones are actually quite large, prominently large, and there's something called the pubic foot, which is a prominent foot on the end of the pubic bone, and basically what they found is that females have an unfused foot end of the pubic bone. Basically this entails and pretty much shows sexual dimorphism within Allosaurus. Now the forearms are proportionally about 35% the length of the hind limbs. The forearms are also made of the ulna and the humerus, which are basically 2 bones in your arms. The humerus is the upper arm bone and the ulna is one of the lower arm bones, and that has a ratio of 1 to 1.2. There's also something with the wrist. The wrist actually has the ability to basically swivel a bit more, and this is known as semilunate carpal. Basically that's the ability it has. Basically it can swivel its wrist a bit more, it can bend its wrist a bit more. Basically this means its wrist was more dexterous. The dew claw, they've actually found that may have actually helped with grasping in its juvenile stages. Now, when Allosaurus was first described, it was actually placed in Allosauridae by Marsh in 1878. But then in the 1970s, it was actually placed in the wastebasket taxon family known as Megalosauridae, and at the time, it was also just known as Antrodemus. Now, sadly, that was because of the first naming of the first described specimen, and Allosaurus was named afterwards. But, however, there's a bit of a history behind why it's now called Allosaurus. Now, this is the first bit of material that was actually found of Allosaurus, and it was discovered in 1869, but wasn't described till later on, and it was described as Antrodemus. Now, there have been other specimens found, such as YPM 1930, and that was made up of fragmentary remains, basically made up of ribs, vertebrae, toe bones and other bits of bone, and that subsequently got named Allosaurus in 1877 by Marsh. He named the species Allosaurus fragilis because of its fragile vertebrae. The actual weight of the vertebrae were actually quite fragile. Now, Allosaurus has several genera synonyms, and these also include what was originally going to be the names of some of the specimens, such as Kerosaurus and Labrosaurus. A lot of specimens from Allosaurus are mainly known in North America, and specifically known from Como Bluff, Colorado, and also in Wyoming and other places around the USA. Now, there's a particularly notable specimen of Allosaurus fragilis, and it's known as AMNH5753, and it was actually discovered by Cope. But however, it wasn't unpacked until 1903, and when they actually unpacked it, they found it was an incredibly very complete specimen, though he never got round to actually unpacking it. So this is why this specimen has actually been recognised as a very significant specimen. Now, there's a particularly significant area in Utah which is known as the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry, and it's found in the Emery County. Basically, what they found there currently described, are 46 Allosaurus fragilis specimens, and basically what happened here is that there was probably a bog, or probably some mud, or probably some quicksand that actually trapped these dinosaurs, because these dinosaurs were actually attracted to the prey that was again trapped in basically the bog, or whatever it was that was actually trapping these herbivores. Basically, they were getting attracted to some water, and then they got stuck, and then the Allosaurus came along, and they eventually got stuck. Now, out of the 46 specimens, there's been a 1 meter specimen, and there's potentially been a 12 meter specimen, but again, you know my thoughts on the 12 meter estimate. Now, one significant specimen is known as Big Al, and his specimen category is MOR 693, and he was excavated near Shell in Wyoming. Now, the specimen was actually 95% complete and was around 8 meters in length, so he was about subadult age. Now, he was only 87% grown. There's actually been documented that 19 bones were either broken or had pathologies. There was at least 5 ribs, 5 vertebrae, 4 foot bones, and bones showing something called osteomyelitis. Basically, there was also a right foot bone that was actually quite prominent, and it shows something called invulacrum. And that was actually a portion of the middle toe bone that was actually damaged and caused inflation, and basically that was rubbing up against the other toes, but what it was doing was actually stopping him from walking properly, and may have actually stopped him from walking like a regular Allosaurus. He may have actually lived with this infection for about 6 months to a year. Another Allosaurus specimen named Big Al, except this one was named Big Al too, also has notable injuries. Specifically, it has injuries on the jaw, neck, ribs, and other parts of the actual animal. Now, currently, there are several species of Allosaurus actually valid. There is Allosaurus fragilis, there is Allosaurus lucasi, there is Allosaurus europaeus, and apparently there is also Allosaurus amplus, but amplus, in my opinion, is just basically an Allosaurus fragilis specimen of large size. There's also yet to be described Allosaurus jumadseni, which I think should be valid. Now, the type species, and the species that I've been talking about the most, is Allosaurus fragilis, and it was basically considered in the 1970s to the 1980s as the short-snouted species, and I'll get onto that later. But it's currently been known as the most common species, so it's actually the most commonly found and most successful Allosaurus species of its time. Now the second species, though it's invalid, is known as Allosaurus atrox. And Allosaurus atrox is actually a long-snouted species, though it's been considered that individual variation within Allosaurus fragilis actually gave two morphs, so that's why some Allosaurus fragilis specimens have long snouts. Now the reason for this change from Allosaurus fragilis and Allosaurus atrox to just Allosaurus fragilis was from analysis of the Cleveland Lloyd Quarry as well as Como Bluff and Dry Mesa Quarry as well as the Morrison Formation, where they actually found Allosaurus individuals are actually part of the same species for the most part, apart from the odd Allosaurus specimen that shows differentiation between the species. Now what they actually found is that Allosaurus atrox and fragilis are basically just the same species, it's just they show incredible variation between the species. The most prominent variation they actually noted was in the lacrimal horns, which showed different shapes between different individuals, and this could be a result of either sexual selection or sexual pressures. So this could actually be shown in some specimens, where you actually find some specimens to show large horns, which could be males, and then some have small horns, which could be female. And I've actually studied this for myself. I've actually looked at this myself, and I found a consistent, continuous variance between one morph and another morph. Basically what I found is that morphs with a shallower skull will actually have smaller crests, while shorter snouted, deeper snouted specimens will actually have larger crests. So they're pretty much representative of males, and the shallow crested ones are actually females. Another species present in North America is known as Allosaurus jumadseni, and it's notable for its difference in the jugal shape from Allosaurus fragilis. And I've noted before that I think Big Al and Big Al 2 are actually representatives of this species, and it shows that jumadseni may have been as diverse in variation between individuals as it was with Allosaurus fragilis. It's also a smaller species, although the only specimens that have been currently found, apart from maybe Big Al and Big Al 2 if they categorise them as adults, are a few juveniles that measure around 3 meters in length. Another species which is currently valid is known as Allosaurus europaeus, and Allosaurus europaeus actually may be just a representative of Allosaurus fragilis in the Lorina Formation, and basically what they've actually found is they've actually found some more Allosaurus europaeus specimens, which actually might clear up the argument. So it's possible that Allosaurus fragilis may have actually had a larger range than previously thought, so maybe it may have actually been able to cross these land bridges, which were still around at the time, and actually dominated not just North America, but also Europe as well. Another species, though it's been actually made invalid now, is known as Allosaurus tendegurensis, and tendegurensis actually lived in Tendaguru, Matawara, Tanzania, and it's either been assigned as a Coelurosaur, a Megalosaur, or a Carcharodontosaurid. And this actual animal, which is not an Allosaurus anymore, may have actually been around 10 meters in length. One notable specimen of Allosaurus fragilis was actually given the name Labrasaurus therox, and what he actually found was it's actually an Allosaurus fragilis that actually suffered a bite wound from another Allosaurus specimen and actually had its jaw broken and disformed, so that's why it's got this weird shape to it. Some Allosaurus specimens have apparently also been found as far as Australia, though these specimens have actually been attributed to actually other animals such as Australovenata and unknown Abelisaurids. Now, there's something very funny about Allosaurus, and you're not going to believe me, but this is true. Allosaurus as a genus is technically dubious, and I'll tell you why. Basically, it should be made a numen dubium, and the reason is because the actual type specimen they based it on, called Ep.9, is actually too fragmentary and has actually had a poor description to be actually classified as an actual genus. So basically Allosaurus shouldn't actually exist in any way. It shouldn't actually be a recognized name. The entire species and the entire research should be just labeled numen dubium. However, there's actually efforts to get the specimen known as USNM 4734 to be the new neotype specimen in order to keep the name from being basically turned into a numen dubium, although this actual request of the neotype specimen has actually been under request for a couple of years now, I believe. Allosaurus as the theropod was actually a caring parent, because what they've actually found is that Allosaurus actually sat upon eggs and incubated them from actual crushed eggs that they found of Allosaurus. Allosaurus' lifespan actually lasted to 22 to 28 years, so that's actually quite a lifespan for such a creature, especially because they had such a rough and aggressive life. Allosaurus juveniles proportionally had longer arms and longer thigh bones than the adults, so this actually possibly made them actually quicker and actually more successful in hunts, possibly because of the length of the arms and also the reach of the legs. So basically the leg span maybe increased their speed. And what they've actually found is that Allosaurus actually grew isometrically. So basically what it meant is that it actually changed very, very little as it grew. So instead of it being like an ontogenetic change like in Tyrannosaurus, there was actually not a lot of change. Maybe there's some proportional changes obviously in the limbs, but not much change at all. And what they've actually found is that the thigh bone was actually one of the changes, and it actually got thicker and wider over the years. Allosaurus's bite force has been estimated around 13,000 newtons. And additionally, they've actually found that maybe Allosaurus actually used different strategies to actually hunt down different prey. It may have actually ran at 33 to 35 kilometers per hour. It may have been cannibalistic from some specimens possessing some bite marks from Allosaurus's, basically the same species, especially with Allosaurus fragilis specimens. It may have actually been able to hear low frequency sounds, detect odors, and there's also been found stress fractures as well as tendon alluviations on some specimens. And one specimen, USNM 4734, actually has a healed left scapular and fibia wound, and also there's been fractured ribs found in other specimens. Allosaurus actually makes up 70 to 75% of the theropod population in the Morrison Formation. In the Morrison Formation, it actually lived alongside a range of pterosaurs, a range of crocodiles, Brachiosaurus, Ceratosaurus, Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus, Torvosaurus, Ornitholestes, Camarasaurus, Stegosaurus, Dryosaurus, Diplodocus, and Camptosaurus in North America. However, in Europe, it also lived alongside other species of Torvosaurus, Stegosaurus, Ceratosaurus, Lurinhasaurus, Lucid Titans, Supersaurus, and other creatures. Allosaurus has got a lot of media attention in the years it's actually been around, especially with its most famous appearance, Walking with Dinosaurs, and the Walking with Dinosaurs special, The Ballad of Big Al. It's been featured in Planet Dinosaur, Arthur Doyle's The Lost World, The Beast of the Hollow Mountains, The Valley of Guanji, and Dinosaur Revolution. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed this particular subject file episode. This was a request by Camosaurus. Hope you enjoyed this, mate. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I shall see you later. Bye bye.